She asked me to walk her down the aisle. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. I paid for the venue. I paid for the dress. I even gave my late wife's necklace, her mother's, to complete the look. I thought this was our moment, our bridge back. But the night before the wedding, she sent a text. Please don't come, no call, no explanation, just silence, and my ex-wife's new husband standing in my place the next day. Everyone saw it. Everyone had questions. I said nothing, but revenge doesn't always need words. She wanted a perfect start. I gave her a perfect collapse, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. No one even knew I was pulling the strings, until it all fell apart. Her honeymoon turned to headlines. Her marriage to mistrust, and me? I just kept smiling, like share, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from. You won't believe how this ends. I always thought there would be a day when things would start to make sense again, after my wife died, after the house got too quiet, after Emily drifted further away with each passing year. I kept telling myself, it'll turn around, maybe at her graduation, maybe when she gets her first job, maybe when she meets the right guy. It didn't, but then she called me, and her voice cracked just a little when she said, Dad, I want you to walk me down the aisle. For a second I felt 19 again, invincible. I didn't even ask who the man was. I just said yes. I paid for the venue, an elegant vineyard overlooking the hills. I handled the guest list when Claire kept forgetting to loop me in. I footed the bill for the photographer, the dress, even the floral designer Claire insisted on. I gave her mother's necklace the night before the rehearsal dinner. She cried, I cried. It felt like a thread reconnecting. And then, the night before the wedding, the text came in, 5 words. Please don't come tomorrow, that was it. No punctuation, no explanation. I stared at it for a full minute before I even realized I'd stopped breathing. I thought it was a mistake at first. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe it was a draft. But no, I called, straight to voicemail. The next morning I sat alone in the house I built with my bare hands, a tuxedo on the hanger, a wedding invitation on the counter, and a silence so complete it felt like the house had been vacuum sealed. I didn't go. I didn't respond. But I watched. Quietly. Claire's husband, Richard, walked her down the aisle. A man who spent less than 4 years in her life, taking the place of someone who'd carried her since her first steps. The guests clapped. The photographer snapped. And I watched it all from a distance, because nothing online stays private for long. People reached out. Friends. Old colleagues. Even my brother. Why weren't you there? Was everything okay? I ignored every message. See, there's a kind of power in silence. A vacuum others rush to fill. And when people start guessing, they often guess wrong. I let them. I smiled. That week, while they were off to their beach resort honeymoon, I started planning. Not rage. Not screaming. Not chaos. That's too loud. Too quick. This had to be precise. Controlled. Quiet. Revenge, after all, is just architecture. You start with a solid foundation. Then you build upward, slowly, symmetrically, elegantly. Claire had always manipulated Emily, subtly but deeply. Guilt was her favorite currency. And Richard? He was a man who lived by reputation alone. Former CEO, now lounging in elite clubs and advisory boards. Vanity in loafers. I began with what they cared about most. Perception. And I had more than enough tools to shatter it. Years ago, I'd kept copies of some paperwork Claire had forgotten about, hidden in the safe she didn't know I had. Details of old trust accounts, documents from our divorce, financials that painted a very different picture than what she liked to project. Minor things, really, until you thread them together. And then there were the photos. The ones Emily didn't know were being taken the day of the wedding by a second shooter I quietly hired for backup coverage, just in case. They told a different story than the Instagram fairy tale, tense expressions, Richard whispering into Claire's ear during the vows, a missed cue on the walk, the necklace she removed before the reception. They told the truth. I didn't post them, not yet. That would be too direct. No, these would be ammunition, not fireworks, and I wasn't just targeting Claire. No, this was Emily's wedding, and Emily would have to feel what I felt. Alone, silenced, discarded. The final step was the honeymoon itself. The resort? I had history there. I designed part of its event wing 15 years ago. And the manager? An old client who owed me a favor. I didn't ask him to ruin anything. I simply let him know who was staying in Suite 14B and let him accidentally leak a detail to a tabloid friend about a high-profile wedding party with a hidden scandal. That's all it took. The headlines came fast. Wedding secrets, heiress bride cuts, biological father for stepdad, family drama at luxury resort sparks online storm. It spiraled from there, and they had no idea who pulled the first thread. By the time they returned from their honeymoon, the media storm had already reshaped the narrative. What started as whispers became fire, and in the absence of my voice, the internet gave me one of its own. The discarded father, the silent architect, the man behind the missing seat. Of course, I never gave a statement, but I didn't need to. When people don't hear from you, they start filling in blanks. With sympathy, with outrage, with projection, I became whatever they needed me to be. Emily called once, just once. I let it ring until voicemail. She didn't leave a message. I don't know if it was guilt or panic that made her reach out, but I wasn't interested in either. Not yet. Claire, on the other hand, was furious. I know her tone even through an email subject line, "You're hurting our daughter." Funny, that never stopped her. What she really meant was, "You're ruining our image." But I still hadn't done anything public. No statements, no direct attacks, just precision leaks. A push here, a whisper there. People don't need much help to tear someone down when they sense blood in the water. The next layer was legal. Emily didn't know that. When she signed the wedding contracts I offered to handle, I'd embedded a clause in the event financing agreement. Nothing malicious, just a lien structure, one that made the wedding debt technically hers, not mine. I waited until she started posting sponsorships and partnerships from her bride-to-influencer rebrand. Then I activated the clause and had a quiet but formal debt notice delivered to her condo. It wasn't about money. It was about paper. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she threw away. Richard, of course, stepped in. He'd always been the fixer, just not a particularly clever one. He tried to contact me through a law firm. I sent back a single-page response. All terms were agreed upon in writing. This is not a dispute. It's a resolution. They didn't like that. Then I moved to the next act. Photos from the wedding, unflattering, unfiltered, unposed, began to surface anonymously across various forums. Her removed necklace, Richard's impatient expressions, Claire's clear discomfort during the reception, none of them grotesque, none cruel, just honest. And honesty, when curated properly, can be more devastating than slander. The internet turned quickly. She looked unhappy. Why wasn't her real dad there? Something's off about this whole thing. Suddenly the fairy tale began to rot at the edges. And Emily? She started unraveling. How do I know? Because she started reaching out to my friends. An old neighbor, my brother, even an email to my former firm's admin, all asking the same quiet question. Is he okay? I was more than okay. I was winning. Still, I waited. Silence had become my sharpest blade. The next shift didn't come through news headlines or financial leverage. It came through memory. I visited the vineyard, not to confront anyone, just to walk the grounds. It was late, off-season, quiet. The staff barely noticed me. I stood under the same arbor where Emily took her vows, the one I'd paid to have custom built. Mahogany with floral latticework. It still bore the faint scent of fresh stain. The manager approached me. He remembered me. He remembered that I paid in full, early, without haggling, and without prompting he said, "We all wondered why you weren't here that day." I didn't answer, just smiled, but I left behind a small envelope, no name, just a flash drive inside. A week later, footage from a security camera made its way to the right inbox. An anonymous upload. No origin traceable. A candid, silent clip of Claire and Richard arguing during the rehearsal, her throwing a wine glass, him stepping away in disgust. No narration. No commentary. Just context. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It reached the right circles, wedding forums, society gossip boards, a few tastemakers with large followings and small morals. Claire called me directly this time. I didn't pick up. The next day, she sent an email. "You're poisoning your own daughter's life." That was the moment I knew it was working, because this had never really been about pain. It was about disillusionment. Emily's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was symbolic. She didn't just exclude me, she replaced me like I was a placeholder. A chapter before the real story began, so I wrote myself back into the story, quietly. I visited a gallery where Emily had once interned. I made a donation, anonymously of course, with a note attached to the donation receipt now framed by the front desk. It read, "To fathers who show up, even when they're not wanted." The gallery posted a photo of it on Instagram, tagged no one. But it spread. Emily saw it. She had to. Because 2 days later, I received a handwritten letter, the first in over a decade. It began, "Dad, I think I made a mistake." But it didn't say what the mistake was. It didn't apologize. It didn't acknowledge the necklace, or the text, or the chair I never got to sit in. So I didn't respond. Instead, I made one final visit. To a law office. My lawyer had been holding something for me for years. A sealed document from my wife, written before she passed. A codicil to her will, outlining a symbolic trust in Emily's name. It was modest, but meaningful. A gesture. I had the right to execute or dissolve it, and I dissolved it, not out of spite, but because it no longer held truth. Her mother believed in legacy, but legacy is earned, not inherited. And Emily had made her choice. I just made mine. Like this story? Tap, like, and share. If you've ever had to take justice into your own hands, subscribe for more silent vengeance. After the codicil was dissolved, a ripple effect began. The trust had been modest, yes, but its presence had legal gravity. It was tied to charitable giving, tax deferments, and most importantly, public image. When the paperwork vanished, so did the credibility of Emily's freshly minted social equity brand she was building off her wedding's viral glow. Quiet calls from potential sponsors slowed. A feature article in a lifestyle magazine was postponed indefinitely. The narrative was shifting, not by force, but by erosion. Meanwhile, Richard's name began surfacing on message boards where reputation lives and dies in hours. Anonymous accounts, some real, some nudged, started connecting dots between his old boardroom scandals and his newfound presence in Emily's world. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't have to. I just made sure the right breadcrumbs were visible again. Then I made my move. The necklace. It was a family heirloom, one of the few things my wife asked me to protect. After Emily took it off at the wedding, disrespected her mother. I knew it didn't belong with her anymore, but retrieving it required tact. So I called in a favor from an estate planner I'd worked with years ago. She arranged a casual lunch with Claire, completely innocuous on the surface. And during that lunch, she admired the necklace. Claire, ever the egoist, tried to flaunt its family importance. The planner gently corrected her. "It's not yours, and it's not Emily's. Technically, it's an asset that can be recalled under Daniel's custodial rights. Rare clause, but it's there." Claire's smile cracked. "Just a little." I never actually filed to reclaim it. I didn't need to. A week later, the necklace arrived in a velvet box on my doorstep. No note, no fanfare, just acknowledgement. The right kind. That weekend, I visited my wife's grave. First time in a while, I brought the necklace. I didn't say much, just sat beside her for an hour in silence. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt intact. And that, for the first time in years, felt like enough. But the story wasn't over. Because Emily wasn't done, she showed up at my door. No text, no warning, just there, standing in the frame with a face I hadn't seen since she was 10. Not polished, not proud, just raw. "Can we talk?" she asked, and I said nothing, just stepped aside. She walked in. She sat in the same chair her mother used to read in. The air was thick with all the things she wasn't ready to say. But I waited because revenge doesn't end with ruin, it ends with recognition. She didn't start with an apology, she started with a memory. "Do you remember when Mom broke her wrist? That summer when I was in high school?" I nodded. "She told me you were the reason, that you'd slammed the door on her during an argument." That wasn't what happened. Claire had slipped on the back steps after refusing to wear the brace her doctor gave her. But she'd always been the kind to rewrite a moment if it got her closer to control. Emily sat quietly after that, picking at her nails, avoiding my eyes. "I believed her for years," she whispered. even when it didn't make sense. I didn't interrupt. She kept going. She told me you only paid for things to manipulate me, that you used guilt the way she used charm, another lie, or perhaps a projection. But when the wedding happened, when you didn't show up and didn't say anything and didn't fight, her voice cracked. That scared me more than anything else ever has. There it was, not an apology, but the echo of one. And I realized something. She'd grown up in Claire's house, but she'd inherited more of me than I thought. Not the silence, the discipline inside it. I stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a small photo album, one she hadn't seen in over a decade. Inside were pictures of her mother, her as a child, the home we built together, the old life before Claire decided it wasn't enough. I handed it to her. She flipped through slowly. "This was real?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. "It always was," I said. "Even when you weren't looking at it?" She nodded, then a long silence, and finally, the words I didn't think I'd hear. "I'm sorry." 3 syllables, unsteady, quiet, but they landed harder than any verdict. I didn't say, "I forgive you." Not yet. Because forgiveness, like revenge, needs to be earned. Instead, I made tea, the same way her mother used to, with honey, not sugar. She smiled at the taste, and we sat, 2 people who'd seen too much of each other's shadows, trying to trace the outlines of the light again. Later that night, after she left, I opened the safe one last time, not for documents, but for the wedding invitation. I burned it slowly, quietly. It didn't feel like vengeance anymore. It felt like closure. Closure doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic monologue, or a single tearful reunion, or a grand moment of forgiveness. It comes quietly, like a house settling in the night, like silence that no longer feels hollow. Weeks passed. Emily didn't disappear this time. She sent small things, a book we used to read, a photo she found of me and her as a toddler at the beach. One afternoon a plant showed up at my door, a bonsai, with a card that simply read, "Trying again." I didn't respond, not out of coldness, but because some things grow best when they're left undisturbed. Then came the wedding photos, not the ones that went viral. These were different, candid, honest. A USB stick dropped off in a plain envelope. No note, but I knew she'd gone through them, every frame, every moment I never witnessed in person, and she'd seen it now too. The absence, the awkward glances, the eyes darting for someone who wasn't there. Me. I never wanted to be the shadow haunting her perfect day, but sometimes absence is louder than presence. That day wasn't perfect. It was a performance, and performances eventually end. Meanwhile, Richard stepped down from a board. Claire deleted half her social media presence. Their world shrank as mine finally began to breathe again. Not because I won, but because I never begged. I never yelled. I never stooped. I just endured and redirected every cut into a counterweight. I began writing again, just sketches at first, then a few blueprints for a friend's small firm. I was working again, not to fill the silence, but because the silence no longer hurt. One afternoon, Emily texted, "Lunch? No pressure. Just a table for 2. This time, I'll walk you in." I didn't say yes. I showed up, and when she stood to greet me, no cameras, no dress, no stage, I saw the truth in her eyes. She knew what she did. She knew what I did. And somehow, there was still room for us to begin again, not as father and daughter pretending the past never happened, but as 2 people who survived it. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's patient. And sometimes justice comes not through destruction, but through survival. Like, share, and subscribe if this story hit deep. Drop a comment. What would you have done if your child replaced you at their own wedding? And tell us, where are you watching from?